All I could say about the next hour was that it passed. Like certain hours in the depth of an illness, it took all that I had to get through it. I was stunned, physically, spiritually, if in fact any spirit was left to me. Half of me was already dead, the other half wanted to die, and indeed I probably came very close to getting my wish. I'd never felt so cold in my life. Pneumonia was a foregone conclusion, death by hypothermia, a very near thing. Yet there was almost no time to worry about dying. We had to move fast. This was Pennsylvania. We were into the hunting season, but it was possible that our shooting had attracted attention. There wasn't even time to feel the horror of the irony. We were now acting out the same scenario that Brightman and my mother had acted out long ago. A bloody corpse, a death that had to be turned into an accident. What else could we do? Since I was already wet, I went through Subotin's pockets for his keys and spare clips of ammunition, and checked to make sure that nothing in his wallet tied him to either of us. His gun, a Valmont semi-automatic, had fallen into the stream, but I was able to find it and threw Brightman's shotgun down in its place. After that, there wasn't much we could do. If the body was found right away, there'd be lots of questions. But this was a deserted spot, and he might lie here all winter. By spring, no one would be able to say what had happened. We returned to the cabin. It was vital that I get into dry clothes, and though Brightman was certain that no one in the area had recognized him, we had to make the place look as if no one had been here for weeks. He began cleaning up while I changed into a pair of his pants and then huddled close to the fire. Slowly I began to thaw, and since the fire was going anyway, I made us some coffee, the first swallow sending a marvelous spill of heat through my chest. When I had that down, Brightman went to a cupboard and got me some whiskey. I stirred in a splash, and its burning sweetness began washing away the bitterness that now filled my mouth. I came back to myself, rose through the fever, focused my eyes, and that's when I said, "Tell me what you know of my mother." He was rolling a sleeping bag. He paused just for an instant, then went on, stuffing it into a blue nylon bag. "I don't know very much. Maybe. But about some things, you know more than me." There was another instant of hesitation. Then abruptly he said, "I didn't meet her until 1942, Mr. Thorne, when she came to America. I think she was at the Sorbonne and became involved with the PCF in the ordinary way. Communism, idealism, the Popular Front. In those days, it was all part of being young and alive. Except with her, it went further. Perhaps that was just chance. I don't know how it happened. I think, but this is only a guess, that she mixed herself up with some of the expatriate leftists who were in Paris then. I know she met Melinda Marling, for example, the American woman who married Donald McLean. There were a lot of Americans. That's probably how she met your father. Had she been recruited by then? Yes, I think so. So their marriage? No, you shouldn't think that. She always knew. You see, he wasn't a communist, not really. She once told me that. But I love him anyway, she said. So what he did for you, that all came through her? No, that would be unfair to both of them. He wasn't seduced, Mr. Thorne, at least not in that sense. They each acted from slightly different motives, but both were completely sincere. He paused then and looked back at me, lighting one of his cheroots and throwing a tin box of them toward me. He was a decent man, a diplomat who knew what the Nazis were doing and was appalled at his own country's lack of response. He told me that the most horrible and shameful period of his life was the years when America stayed out of the war. That showed what America really was, he said. I thought of Hamilton then, the decent man. I couldn't help it, and to place my father on the same level made my stomach turn over. But I steadied myself. At that time, though, the Russians weren't in the war either. No, but he excused them. They signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact to buy time, not because they wanted 1/4 of Poland. That was true in a way. They, in fact, wanted both. Then that's when he started working for them? Yes. But that couldn't have been through my mother. He sent her away before Paris fell. Francois, your mother, was an amateur. By then the professionals had taken over. Like you? I'm not sure I deserve the title, but yes, like me, though I wasn't the first. I only assumed control over him after the war. I'd been sitting wrapped in a blanket. Now I tossed it over to him, and he used it to bundle up some of his food. Watching him work, I thought, I discovered his secrets, but he's telling me mine. Then I said, after the war, when you knew him, what did he do? At first he kept on, but he became more and more uneasy. McCarthy, the witch hunts, that sort of thing kept him going. But he wasn't a communist, and he certainly wasn't a Stalinist. He'd supported the Russians because that seemed the best way to strike at the Germans, but as time went on, thinking like that became more and more difficult. He was hooked, though? Yes, son, Mr. Thorne, but I expect your mother was much more important. She believed. I was prepared to let him wiggle away, and in fact, I did. He began shifting his career, taking himself out of the path of the more important material, but your mother would never have let him stop altogether. Except he did, with that gun. That week was terrible for him. It was the week of the Hungarian uprising, you remember? I was only a boy. Well, it was a terrible week for a lot of people. Your mother became very frightened and phoned me. She was afraid he'd turn himself in. I panicked, I'll admit, partly because that's just what I wanted to do myself. You met Hamilton. I called him and asked him to do something, since they were both in the State Department, but he refused. That made me even more frightened. I knew if he did turn himself in, that I was finished. He was an honorable man. He wouldn't have wanted to betray me, but he would have. So what happened? We came here and talked. I'd had this place for years, you see. It made a discreet, convenient meeting place between Toronto and Washington. Your father had helped me find it. He was terribly upset. The Russians hadn't sent in the tanks yet, but he knew they were going to. He had access to all the State Department estimates, and that's what they were saying. I told him he couldn't be sure and calmed him down. But of course he knew he was right. Still, I always wondered if that's why he did it when he did, before the Russians made their move. That way, at the end, he could still have a little doubt, a doubt which was equivalent to a last faint hope that things might have turned out differently. In any case, he became very despondent, and your mother got a message to me, but I didn't feel safe coming here, so we agreed to meet in the woods. I remember wondering later whether he'd brought that gun intending to shoot us all, but in fact he'd killed himself before I arrived. I remember, just as I was leaving, that there was someone. I always wondered. Yes, that was me. I'm very sorry. What happened after that? What was my mother's reaction? In what way? Toward you. It steeled her, I suppose you might say. She went on. I didn't really want her to, but she did. She passed me gossip, little items. It was used to keep an eye on her. You mean in case she ever took it into her head to betray you? That wasn't a worry. I just felt responsible even for you. If you don't mind me saying so, when we met, she'd usually mention you. One year I realized you were in New York at the same time as May, so I arranged that you meet. And I suppose that's one more thing I should apologize for. Should he have apologized for anything? Then I didn't care. Later I wasn't sure, but what he said after this, even if he meant it as an apology, was 100 times better, for it seemed to explain. And though he was attempting to describe my father, to give me some guide as to how I should feel toward what he'd done, his words ended by giving me a clearer picture of Brightman himself. I just want you to know something, he said, about your father and who he was. Above all, I don't want you to think he was that much different from the person you remember. Don't overestimate the importance of any of this. You knew him, as his son, better than I ever did. Who you are is a truer indication of his qualities than any of his secrets reveal. And I'm not trying to comfort you. In fact, I'm trying to warn you about the dangers of romanticizing him. That's what happened to those times, you see. They've become part of the movies. Even the Depression, even treason, has been given the golden glow of nostalgia. I hear it all the time. People were wrong, but committed. What they did was mistaken, but daring? You see, Philby, Blunt, Burgess, McLean, they can all be turned into heroes. I can even do that to myself, and you may be tempted to think of your father that way. Don't. You'll do him a disservice. It's easy, looking back, to forget the distinctions between people, but I lived through those times, and believe me, they were there. Some people were attracted to communism because capitalism was collapsing. People were starving, and the liberal democracies were turning fascist. In principle, there was nothing shameful in that. Under the circumstances, it only made sense to consider alternatives, and communism, at first glance, was no worse than the others. But only at first glance. Closer inspection revealed to a good number of people enough of the truth to turn them away. There's distinction number one, because, of course, a good many stayed. And, of course, each purge, murder, or massacre eliminated some of them, and these, if you like, are subcategories of diminishing gullibility. Some could swallow what they said about Trotsky, but not about Bukharin, and that should honorably distinguish them, say, from people who were still justifying Andropov when he was murdering Imre Nagy in Budapest. Compare the two extremes, if you like. At one end of the spectrum is the loyal, dedicated communist who left the party over the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and at the other are the loyal, dedicated communists of today who still try to pretend that the Gulag only existed because Stalin was mad. Of course, I'm condemning myself. I've been dedicated and loyal and committed to barbarism, though in fact that's probably too generous. Too grandiose. In the end, I haven't even served an ideology, but rather a second-rate country that can't even feed itself. And if, toward the end of my life, I've come to realize the obvious, it's been the result of pure accident. May, as you know, was an accident. That chance, having her, loving her, a freak of sentimentality, is the only reason I can speak this much sense. But now compare me to your father. Draw that distinction, you see. You can't claim him as a hero, but give credit where credit is due. He saw the truth, not immediately, but before many others, and where others permitted themselves to be blackmailed, literally, or through their own guilt, or simply by circumstance, he refused. This far, but no farther, and the ultimate price for his mistake was paid by himself. He paused then and shrugged. For me, his death wasn't even entirely wasted, because when I saw him, lying there in the woods, I understood in a way I hadn't before. This is what it comes down to. This is what it all means. One more dead body. What could I say? Not much, I suppose. It was a speech. He spoke it well, and I had neither the experience nor the wisdom required to comment. Besides, there was no time. We'd done as much as we could to the hut, and Subotin's gun, disassembled, was stowed in my bag. We couldn't take a chance on the police tracing a high-powered rifle to a man who tripped over his shotgun. Staggering beneath cartons and satchels, we made our way down the path and up to the road. Last problems, inching the pickup around Subotin's parked car. Last details, getting the scabbard from the back seat, remembering to shove his keys over the visor. Then, headlights off, we drove up the side road to the road where I'd parked. My car was still there. No one had touched it. No one, we both felt certain, had seen us. So, still clad in the old man's sweater and pants, I got down from the pickup, and then, for a last instant, I leaned on the door. Now, much too late, my mind was filling with questions that only he could give answers to. If May was the key to his life, how had he found her? What was the truth about Dimitrov and Granger, and what did he know about Traven? Perhaps he saw all this running through my mind, and I think he relished keeping these mysteries. But then, at the end, I gave him one, or at least we exchanged them. For just as he extended his hand, I told him to wait, went to my car and fetched him that little traveling icon that Yuri Shastov had given me. For May, I said, from all her fathers, real and imagined. He took it from me, opened it, and then his eyes seemed to beseech me. Do you know? He asked. Have you found out? Whatever I found, Mr. Brightman, you knew it already. Then I beg you, don't look any further. And even as I formed the words to ask what he meant, I knew I'd waited too long. Letting go of my hand, he backed the truck around, and finally, two headlights running over a hill, a last image of golden eyes, Harry Brightman passed out of my life. But not quite.